July 1st, 1940. Greenock, Scotland, Clyde Estuary. A thick dawn fog clung to the harbor as naval lanterns flickered weakly across the water, their glow catching the steel hulls of ships that officially did not exist on any Royal Navy departure roster. Shore crews moved in tense silence, boots thudding against wet timber, breath steaming in the cold air as they loaded heavy, unmarked crates onto the waiting transports. Each crate was identical, sealed, reinforced, and stamped only with a small coded number. Inside them lay something far more valuable than weapons, fuel, or rations: the bulk of Britain's gold reserves, withdrawn in total secrecy from the Bank of England vaults beneath Threadneedle Street, packed under armed guard and rushed north under cover of darkness. The nation's wealth, its wartime purchasing power, its ability to remain solvent, was now stacked like ammunition in the belly of a convoy preparing to cross a submarine-infested Atlantic. No fanfare, no speeches. Not even the sailors loading the cargo were allowed to know what they were handling. They had been told it was industrial machinery bound for secure storage. Only the senior officers understood the truth. Operation Fish, the largest financial evacuation in recorded history, was about to begin. Commander Henry R. Harland, Royal Navy Reserve, stood on the deck of HMS Enterprise, coat flapping in the cold wind as he reviewed the coded orders again, his fingers tracing the embossed edges of the sealed envelope. The mission outline was simple on paper, yet impossibly complex in execution. Escort Convoy BHX 64. Rendezvous with additional vessels from Halifax. Maintain strict radio silence for the entire crossing and deliver every crate to the Dominion of Canada without enemy detection. Canada's vaults were deep inland, beyond the reach of Luftwaffe bombers and U-boat torpedoes. But to reach them, the convoy first had to survive the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth. Below deck, the hum of engines reverberated through the ship as the crew ran last-minute checks. The starboard turbines had been acting up since Portsmouth, and Harland knew that a mechanical failure midway across the Atlantic, especially while guarding cargo valued at more than the entire national budget, could doom the operation. Worse still, German U-boats had begun moving aggressively along the western approaches, hunting convoys with Wolfpack tactics pioneered only months earlier. If the Kriegsmarine intercepted this convoy and realized what it carried, the propaganda victory alone could shatter British morale. Harland stepped toward the railing, fog beating on his cap brim. In the distance, silhouettes of merchant ships emerged: Reina del Pacifico, SS Batory, Duchess of York, each freshly painted, each with additional bracing welded along the hull to support the weight of their hidden cargo. These were not warships. They were liners and freighters pressed into service, loaded far below their waterlines with gold, securities, and negotiable bonds representing Britain's entire economic lifeline. A soft clatter drew his attention. A group of Marines, rifles slung, marched a final crate up the gangway of SS Batory. The crate was smaller than the rest, reinforced with internal steel plating. Harland recognized it immediately. It held strategic documents, war contracts, foreign exchange notes, and a detailed ledger of every gold bar loaded for transport. If even one item from that crate fell into enemy hands, the consequences would spread far beyond the war at sea. A runner approached, boots slipping on the damp deck. "Sir, signal station received another coded fragment from London." Harland took the folded slip. It was brief, only a single line. "Increased U-boat activity west of Rockall. Possible interception attempt." He read it twice, jaw tightening. The Germans did not know about the gold, not yet, but something in their patrol routes had shifted in the past 24 hours. If Admiral Donitz had redeployed Wolfpacks toward the convoy lanes, the timing was dangerously close to the operation's departure. Too close to be coincidence. Harland stepped toward the railing, beating on his cap brim. In the distance, silhouettes of merchant ships emerged. Reina del Pacifico, SS Batory, Duchess of York, each freshly painted, each with additional bracing welded along the hull to support the weight of their hidden cargo. These were not warships. They were liners and freighters pressed into service, loaded far below their waterlines with gold, securities, and negotiable bonds representing Britain's entire economic lifeline. A soft clatter drew his attention. A group of Marines, rifles slung, marched a final crate up the gangway of SS Batory. The crate was smaller than the rest, reinforced with internal steel plating. Harland recognized it immediately. It held strategic documents, war contracts, foreign exchange notes, and a detailed ledger of every gold bar loaded for transport. If even one item from that crate fell into enemy hands, the consequences would spread far beyond the war at sea. A runner approached, boots slipping on the damp deck. "Sir, signal station received another coded fragment from London." Harland took the folded slip. It was brief, only a single line. "Increased U-boat activity west of Rockall. Possible interception attempt." He read it twice, jaw tightening. The Germans did not know about the gold, not yet, but something in their patrol routes had shifted in the past 24 hours. If Admiral Donitz had redeployed wolfpacks toward the convoy lanes, the timing was dangerously close to the operation's departure. Too close to be coincidence. Harland pocketed the message and made his way to the bridge, where the sea chart lay unrolled under dim red lamps. The plotted course avoided the usual shipping lanes, cutting sharply northwest into rougher waters, an unpredictable route meant to deter submarine tracking. But unpredictability carried its own risks. Heavy storms had been spotted forming between Iceland and the Faroe Islands. Sailing into them would help conceal the convoy, but it would also render air cover impossible and scatter ships already heavy with dangerous cargo. The bridge door creaked open as First Officer Collins entered, his face pale in the lamplight. "Sir, the men are asking if the Admiralty expects trouble. Morale steady, but they can sense something unusual." Harland considered his answer carefully. They couldn't know the truth, but they could not afford fear either. "Tell them only this," he said finally. "If this convoy fails, Britain fails with it." Collins nodded, the weight of the words settling across his shoulders. Outside, the fog began to thin, revealing the convoy in full. More than 30 ships, engines rumbling in low, synchronized vibrations, their hulls cutting through the still water in slow, deliberate unison. No flags were flown, no navigation lights flickered. Silence hung over the formation like a shroud. As Harland stepped onto the bridge wing, he felt the strange, heavy stillness that often precedes a storm or an ambush. The sea lay unnaturally calm, the horizon flat and featureless. Too quiet, too still. He had crossed the Atlantic enough times to know that such calmness rarely meant safety. A gull circled above, crying into the emptiness before disappearing into the gray haze. He reached for his binoculars. A faint shadow, distant, low, indistinct, moved along the waterline far to the west. Too distant to identify, too slow to be a destroyer, too steady to be drifting wreckage. He lowered the binoculars, breath tightening. If that shape was what he feared, a U-boat conning tower stalking the formation before the escort group had even departed, then someone somewhere had leaked the convoy's timing or route. But how? Operation Fish had been planned with suffocating secrecy. No public records, no press, no open radio channels. Only a handful of officers knew the cargo's true nature. Harland looked again toward the horizon. The shadow was no longer visible. Perhaps a wave, or a trick of the fog, or the first sign of a threat capable of not only altering the war, but the financial survival of an entire empire. He exhaled slowly, cold air burning in his lungs. "Signal all ships, he said, steady but low. "Commence silent departure. Maintain blackout conditions." As the convoy began to move, engines rumbling in unison, the quiet shape on the horizon remained hidden beneath the gray haze. Whether it was harmless or deadly, no one on board HMS Enterprise could know. But the timing was too precise, and the ocean too still, and the mission far too valuable for chance. And as the first ship slipped into the open sea, Harland couldn't shake the feeling that the convoy was already being watched by eyes that should not have known it was coming at all. July 3, 1940, Mid-Atlantic, 06:47 hours. The convoy pushed westward into a rolling gray wilderness as metallic swells slapped against the hulls and thick, overcast skies pressed low over the formation, the ocean stretching in every direction like a shifting sheet of dull steel, while HMS Enterprise cut through the waves in measured strides, its engines thumping with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that everyone aboard silently prayed would hold. The gold-laden merchant ships followed in tight columns behind, silent and heavy, their holds packed with crates worth more than the entire British Empire's annual revenue. Their decks manned by sailors who still thought they were escorting industrial cargo. Commander Henry Harland stood on the bridge, binoculars to his eyes, scanning the horizon for the faintest anomaly, while the wireless operator repeated the same phrase every 30 minutes. "Radio silence holding. No transmissions detected." That phrase was a relief and a threat, because silence meant safety, but it also meant blindness. If the convoy blundered into a U-boat wolf pack, no ship would be able to call for help without breaking the mission's most crucial directive. Below deck, the engine room throbbed with heat and sweat as mechanics worked over turbine casings that had begun to vibrate more violently with each passing hour. The ship was carrying extra ammunition and depth charges, nearly double its usual combat load, and the strain showed. Harland knew the real danger was not the destroyer escorts, there were only 2 of them, but the vast gap in the center of the convoy, where the civilian liners, bloated with gold and securities, lumbered at speeds far below their peacetime capabilities. Any hole in the formation, any ship that lagged even slightly, could become a beacon for a stalking U-boat commander. At 07:12 hours, the first unsettling sign appeared. Not an enemy contact, but a sudden ripple across the surface of the sea, a small patch of disturbed water that vanished as quickly as it formed. The lookout called it a harmless swell pattern, but Harland felt his stomach tighten. He had seen such disturbances before, water displaced by a submerged hull passing close beneath the surface. "Keep course," he ordered quietly, but his tone carried the weight of suspicion. A few minutes later, an escort destroyer, the HMS Otterhound, signaled, visually, using a shuttered lamp. Possible underwater contact, no charges unless confirmed. The rules of the operation were clear, no aggressive maneuvers unless necessary. The Admiralty feared that loud anti-submarine action might draw even more U-boats into the area, and if the Germans discovered the value of the cargo, the Atlantic would become a hunting arena of unimaginable disaster. Harland stepped out onto the bridge wing, wind cutting cold across his face, and watched the sea behind the convoy churn as each ship plowed forward, leaving long, foamy scars in its wake. Somewhere beneath that restless skin, he imagined a periscope shadowing them, tracking their bearing, logging their speed. Yet for 2 hours nothing happened. The ocean seemed to settle, the swells becoming more rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Even the clouds thinned slightly, revealing streaks of pale morning light. Some of the younger sailors eased their shoulders, believing the danger had passed. But Harland felt an unease he could not explain. Something was wrong, not on the surface, not in the sky, but in the quiet. The Atlantic was rarely this still, and in wartime, stillness was a warning. At 03 hours, the lookout's voice sliced through the calm. "Smoke to starboard! Low on the horizon!" Harland swung his binoculars instantly. There, barely visible, was a thin, wavering line of smoke, too faint for a surface combatant, too light for a merchant, and moving too slowly to be weather. A German U-boat running its diesels on the surface? Possibly, but the plume behaved oddly, rising and falling, fading and returning, as if the vessel producing it was deliberately adjusting power. "It's shadowing us," Harland muttered. Even at distance, he could tell the ship, if it was a ship, was mimicking the convoy's speed, staying just far enough to avoid recognition, but close enough to maintain contact. Visual communication was impossible. Radar was too primitive at the moment to help, and radio silence could not be broken. The convoy pressed on, but unease spread across the escort crews. HMS Otterhound adjusted its position closer to the merchant liners, while HMS Enterprise angled slightly outward, forming a barrier between the mysterious silhouette and the loaded transports. A cold rain began to fall, carried by a wind that grew sharper with every minute, droplets splattering against the bridge windows. Then the call came again. "Contact! Object is altering course, closing distance." Harland raised his glasses just in time to see the shape emerge more clearly between the shifting fog banks. It wasn't a U-boat. It wasn't a destroyer either. It was a small vessel, long, low, and unmarked. A trawler? A disguised Q ship? No, the silhouette was wrong. Too angular, too light. It looked civilian. But no civilian vessel should have been here, and certainly not one pacing a secret convoy in the middle of the Atlantic. "What in God's name are you?" Harland whispered. The stranger ship slowed suddenly, almost stopping before turning sharply away, fading into the mist. It had tested them, watched them, measured them, and then vanished. Harland's instinct screamed. "Possible reconnaissance vessel," Collins murmured, voice trembling. Harland didn't answer. His mind raced through the possibilities. The Germans had used disguised merchant trawlers fitted with radios to shadow convoys and call in U-boats. But the timing, so early in the voyage, felt too precise, almost as if someone had known when and where Operation Fish would sail. At 12:40 hours, the sea began to change as the convoy neared the edge of a massive low-pressure system. The wind rose sharply, bending the ocean into frothing ridges. Rain thickened into a continuous roar as sheets of water slammed against the decks. The calm from earlier disappeared. Now the Atlantic unleashed its full force, waves rising like dark monuments against the convoy's fragile silhouettes. The storm became both shield and threat. Aircraft patrols, friendly or hostile, could no longer fly. Submarines would struggle to maintain depth. But the convoy speed dropped further, and communication between ships dwindled to shouted commands swallowed by the wind. Harland gripped the railing as HMS Enterprise crested a massive wave and plunged down its far side, water slamming so hard across the bow that the ship seemed to groan in pain. Through the downpour, he watched the civilian liners rolling dangerously, their decks dipping low enough to vanish behind walls of water. "Signal from Reina del Pacifico! Engine trouble! Port side turbine overheating!" A disaster. The ship carried one of the largest gold consignments in the convoy. It could not stop. The storm howled, drowning the horizon in chaos. No enemy was visible. No periscope broke the surface. No shadow stalked them. Yet Harland felt the unseen threat more intensely than ever, because storms were perfect for U-boats. In heavy seas, sound signatures blurred, propeller noise scattered, and depth charges lost accuracy. Submarines often use storms to mask their approach before launching blind spread attacks. Harland eyed the skiing sea below. Nothing. But that meant nothing. "Depth charges ready, but hold on my command." The escort destroyers heaved through the storm, bows carving deep trenches through the black water as they formed a closer screen. The storm raged on for hours. By 1600 hours, night had begun to creep across the sky early, the clouds thickening until day itself seemed to dissolve. And then, just as the convoy stabilized, the sonar operator aboard HMS Otterhound reported a faint, intermittent echo beneath the waves, a contact, weak, fleeting, indistinguishable, but real, a shadow moving under them. Harland felt his pulse thud in his ears. The ocean hid everything now, ships, enemies, possibilities, and somewhere beneath the waves, something was trailing them, something patient, something waiting. He stared into the storm-dark horizon as another wave smashed across the bow. Operation Fish could not afford to lose a single ship, not one crate, not one bar of gold, not one slip of bond paper. And yet, as the convoy plunged deeper into the Atlantic night, he could not shake the cold certainty pressing at the back of his mind, that whatever had found them in the fog that morning was not finished. It was repositioning, watching, and waiting for the moment the storm stopped hiding the convoy from the rest of the world. July 4th, 1940, Mid-Atlantic, 23:58. The storm had finally begun to exhaust itself, but what it left behind was worse than chaos. An ocean so still it looked like polished stone, a night so black it swallowed the convoy whole, and a tension so sharp it felt like the entire fleet was balanced on the edge of an unseen blade. The ships moved cautiously through the darkness, their engines throttled low to reduce noise, their decks soaked in cold mist, and their crews bleary-eyed after nearly 18 hours of continuous battle with wind and sea. Commander Henry Harland stood on the bridge of HMS Enterprise, collar soaked, eyes burning from fatigue, but every muscle in his body remained taut with expectation. The sonar echo HMS Otterhound reported before the storm, weak, fleeting, and easily dismissed, had taken root in his mind like a splinter. U-boats never trailed a convoy alone, and certainly not across half an ocean. They hunted in packs, communicating silently beneath the waves through coded signals and prearranged rendezvous. If even one U-boat had found them, others would not be far behind. The convoy's unique route, far north, nearly brushing the edge of Icelandic waters, was supposed to ensure isolation. But the small shadow ship from the morning before had changed everything, and something about the timing gnawed at him. "Sir," the navigator whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Speed holding at 12 knots, formation stable." Harland didn't respond immediately. He was listening. Not for the wind or the waves, but for the silence between them. Silence was dangerous. Silence meant a predator was near. Inside the bridge, dim red lamps cast long shadows across the chart table, where the latest position markings glowed faintly under grease pencil circles. They were entering what sailors called the dead corridor, a region of deep, cold water where sonar often failed and compasses drifted slightly, a place where U-boats had recorded some of their earliest and easiest kills against Allied convoys. Harland leaned over the chart and exhaled, fogging a small patch of the glass plotting surface. "Any radar returns?" The wireless officer shook his head. "Negative, sir. No surface contacts within range." That didn't comfort him. German submarines preferred to attack on the surface at night, using high speed to outrun escorts before diving. But tonight, the sea was too calm. Their silhouettes would be too clear. If the wolf pack was here, and Harland was increasingly sure it was, they'd be submerged, using passive hydrophones to track the convoy's propeller rhythm. HMS Enterprise continued slicing through the still water, the bow light extinguished, the deck quiet except for the soft hiss of waves against steel. In the heart of the convoy, Reina del Pacifico, still struggling with her overheating turbine, lagged only slightly, but any divergence from the line increased the risk. She carried nearly a third of the gold. Harland bit the inside of his cheek. Then, at 0017 hours, the sound arrived. Not through sonar, not through radar, through the hull itself. A faint, rhythmic tapping, metal on metal, echoing up through the keel like the heartbeat of something deep and mechanical beneath them. Harland froze. "Engine room," he snapped into the voice pipe. "Report any anomalies." A crackle, then a confused voice answered. "Engine stable, sir. No internal noise." Then the tapping came again, faster this time, closer. Harland's blood ran cold. It was unmistakable. A U-boat adjusting ballast, trimming depth, right beneath them. "Full alert," he whispered, eyes fixed on the dark water. "Silent readiness. No lights, no depth charges, unless confirmed." The crew moved like shadows, every motion deliberate, quiet. The seconds crawled. The tapping continued beneath the hull, then stopped abruptly. Silence. Total and crushing. "What's it doing?" Collins murmured. Harland shook his head slowly. Waiting. A few minutes passed. Then, out of the darkness, a faint glimmer flickered on the starboard horizon. Tiny, almost imperceptible, but rhythmic, blinking. "Light signal," the lookout hissed. Harland raised his binoculars. The flash repeated, 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. A pattern, not random, not natural, a signal. Collins paled. A U-boat contacting others? "No," Harland said slowly, pulse thrumming in his ears. "Not a U-boat. Their conning towers are too low for a signal lamp." He lowered the binoculars. A surface ship, observing us again. The shadow from the previous day. Harland's mind raced. The ship had shown itself twice now. Once in fog, once during stillness, and both times at distances perfect for relaying intelligence by radio without revealing its identity. But who was it? A disguised German trawler? A neutral vessel bribed into cooperation? A merchant raider stalking us ahead of a wolf pack? Before he could decide, the sea itself answered. HMS Otterhound signaled, this time not visually, but through a sudden echoing shudder of her engines as she surged forward at flank speed. Her searchlight snapped on for half a second against strict orders, just long enough to illuminate a black shape slicing through the water barely 400 meters off Reina del Pacifico's bow. A torpedo wake, white, fast, unmistakable. "Hard to port!" Harland roared. Chaos erupted. Klaxons shrieked across the convoy. Engines roared. Merchant ships veered wildly, their bows carving frantic arcs through the dark water. The torpedo streaked forward, churning a bright, deadly scar across the surface. Reina del Pacifico heeled sharply, her port rail dipping dangerously low. Men shouted, grabbing for cargo lashings, slipping across wet decks. The torpedo passed so close beneath her keel that Harland could see its phosphorescent trail as it disappeared into the black. A near miss. Too close. Far too close. "Multiple torpedo tracks!" came another cry. Harland scanned the water. 2 more white scars angled from different directions, converging toward the convoy. A coordinated spread, a wolf pack strike. Engines thundered across the formation as destroyers surged forward. HMS Enterprise shuddered violently as Harland ordered maximum speed, the bow lifting high over the next wave before slamming down with a thunderous crash. "Depth charges, Ray!" "Hold!" Harland snapped. "We drop only when we're over their line." The convoy scattered as much as their captains dared, gold-laden hulls rolling deeply under sudden maneuvers. Another torpedo streaked past SS Batory, missing her rudder by less than 10 meters. A fourth passed under Duchess of York, exploding harmlessly far behind the formation, but the blast's shockwave rattled every ship. "This is too coordinated," Collins muttered. "They're firing blind through a storm-dark sea, yet every torpedo is aimed perfectly." Harland's throat tightened. "Not blind," he whispered. He looked toward the horizon, the direction of the blinking light. The shadow vessel had vanished again, but its purpose was now obvious. It had been marking their bearing, their speed, their drift, acting as a guiding beacon for the U-boats hidden beneath the convoy, a surface spotter, a hunter's lantern. "We've been betrayed," Harland said roughly. "Someone gave away the route, the timing, everything." HMS Otterhound dropped the first depth charge pattern. The sea erupted in towering columns of water and flame, the explosions echoing across the night like thunder. A second destroyer followed, then Enterprise herself. The sea thundered, boiled, roared as charges detonated in calculated stair-step patterns. For a moment there was nothing but noise. Then a plume of black oil rose to the surface, then another, and then the unmistakable groan of a ruptured pressure hull rising toward the surface. A U-boat broke through the waves, stern first, its conning tower crushed inward, seawater streaming down its mangled sides. Cheers erupted across the ships, brief, strained, disbelieving. But Harland felt no triumph, because oil slicks meant at least one kill. The torpedo spreads meant at least 3 attackers. And the silence that followed meant the rest had not retreated. They were repositioning, regrouping, waiting to strike again. The convoy steadied itself, its formation ragged, but intact. No ships lost, no gold sunk, not yet. Harland stared into the black Atlantic, heart pounding, jaw clenched. They were still days from Halifax, and tonight's attack proved one thing with chilling certainty. The Germans knew the convoy existed, and they would keep coming until they tore it open or were torn apart. He gripped the rail, feeling the cold spray sting his face. "Signal all ships," he whispered. "Tight formation, maximum vigilance." He paused. "And prepare for another attack before dawn." The ocean swallowed his words, but not the dread behind them. The convoy pressed on into the dark, carrying Britain's future in its holds, while somewhere below and beyond the horizon, unseen predators adjusted their bearings, not drawn by chance, but by knowledge no enemy should have had.